Hi, I'm Hallie, and I want to welcome you to the Odd Life Podcast. That's spelled AWED, which stands for Awake, Well, and Empowered. In this space, you will hear inspirational stories, candid and heartfelt conversations, as well as advice from experts, all with the intention of helping women like you live odd AF. Because I believe the more of us that live awake, well, and empowered, the better this world will be. So thank you for being here and welcome to your odd life. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Hallie. Thanks for being here. I'm so excited for you to listen to this next conversation with my guest, Deanna Raybourn. She is both a New York Times and USA Today bestselling novelist. I'm having her on the podcast today because I absolutely love two things about her writing, her novels, as well as herself. I have followed her since probably 2010 and been paying attention to what she's been publishing and who she is as an individual. And of course, you only know what people put out there on social media, but I have just enjoyed thoroughly getting to know her, right? Getting to know her however much you can through social media. Just the way that she is and how she shows up for others and her wit is just fantastic. And it shows in her writing. All of her characters are witty, they're strong, they're courageous, and they don't necessarily follow society's rules. And I love that. She is so delightful. She is fun. She is a woman that knows who she is, and she writes characters that do the same. If you love reading strong women characters and love thrillers, I don't mean thriller as in really gory, but thrillers as in a whodunit. And these historical mystery thriller novels that she has are all just so well written and entertaining. And they actually act as inspiration to me. These women are out doing things they don't normally get to do as females during this time period. And they're kind of bucking the system. And I love it. And I really hope you get a chance to pick up one of her books here soon. Either go to the local library or your local bookstore and find one of her series, either the Julia Gray series, the Veronica Speedwell series, or even her standalone right now of Killers of a Certain Age. And it's going to be part of a series here soon, hopefully. But that actually won a Barry Award for Best Thriller back in 2022. Of course, I'm going to link all the things she mentions in the show notes, as well as links to her website where you can find her online, how you can find her books, all of that. She is definitely worth picking up. That is for sure. I've loved to get to know her, and I think you will too in this conversation. Here's my guest, Deanna Raybourn. Deanna, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. I know this is maybe an unusual platform for you to be on as far as what I talk about normally. But the reason I wanted to have you on is because I absolutely loved your characters. We're going to get into those here in a second. But I want to talk about you as well. I think it's not realized how hard this occupation is because how much you write and then how much you cut out, how much you put back in, all the processes that go in before that book actually lands on the shelves. And I do want to ask you because this is about awake, well, and empowered. And your role and what you do is a very important one, but also one that's true to you. And I wanted to ask you, where does this love of writing come from? When did you start? When did you know this was the occupation for you?
Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. It's nice to have a different type of platform to chat on. I always knew I was going to write. I always knew I was a storyteller. I remember being incredibly excited when I learned how to print because I could get the stories out of my head and
Yeah.
onto well, I was a child of the 70s, so it was a Big Chief tablet, which I think now is probably not politically correct anymore. There were these rough sheets of newsprint that you would have. And I still actually use newsprint when I'm plotting. I get 2x3 pads of newsprint and markers and plot out the book sometimes when I'm working. But I always knew I was going to tell stories. They were always in there. So when I went to college, I double majored in English and history. I knew I wanted to write historical fiction. And then I wrote my first novel when I was 23, and it was dreadful. It was 120,000 words. It was grossly overwritten. But I sent it into a publisher in New York who sent it back and obviously was not going to publish it. But with the rejection letter, like the last line of it was, "But I think your writing is absolutely wonderful." And I thought, okay, this is somebody who's paid to know decent writing. He thinks my writing is good. I can do this. And it took me another 14 years and about another 7 or 8 books before I finally got published. But when I got a publishing deal, I was immediately under contract for 3 books. And then within 5 or 6 months, we had another contract with the same publisher. So I went from being a person who had multiple books living under the bed that were never going to see the light of day to being under contract for 6 books. And I haven't looked back since.
Well, there's that voice in your head that you have to listen to, and it could be a voice that tells you, "You suck, you're not good at this," and there's a voice that says, "Hey, keep going." Did you ever have that, or did you have something that kept you pursuing? Because that's a big deal to have all these things that you've written and not being published. It could have discouraged you a long time ago, and you kept going. I think that's in itself is a major feat, but what was it inside of you that said, "Keep going"?
I think it was the inability to stop.
Mhm.
This is what I do. This is who I am. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I'm a daughter. But if all those things got taken away, the one thing that will never leave me is I'm a storyteller. That's what I started with. And that's never going anywhere. That's the lens through which I view the entire world. Anything that I take in, I'm always, how can I incorporate that in a story? How does that relate? I'm fascinated by other people's stories. And so that's how I approach relationships. It's how I approach new experiences. It's like I said, it's the lens through which I see the world. It's how I interpret things. And I think all artists do that depending on their medium. If you're a composer, you're going to do it through music. If you're a painter, you're going to do it through the medium of paint. And that's just who you are.
And to know yourself at such a young age, because I think back to who I was at 23 years old, and I felt like such a baby looking back at that. But to have such a strong voice and to have such a conviction at that age, was it something that you grew up just either was it role modeled to you, or was it something that you just have such a strong conviction about who you are from the very beginning? How did you find yourself at such a young age? It was admirable of you to know what you wanted at that age.
I was absolutely a baby, but I was also married. Like I got married at 22 on the
Mm,
day I graduated from college. So we kind of grew up together. We're still very happily married. And to his credit, he was the person who said, in addition to my parents, yeah, I 100% believe you can do this.
mm,
Everybody knew it was really long odds, but nobody, not my parents, not my husband, said, I don't think you should try.
yeah.
Everybody said, be aware of the heartbreak involved and how long it can take. And even then, it never occurred to me, hey, you're going to sit down and you're going to write this novel from start to finish. And you're going to do this over and over again for 14 years
Yeah.
before anybody cares. I don't think I expected that. But, when I first got out of college, I taught high school for 3 years.
Hmm.
And I quit when my husband and I decided to start a family. I was about 3 months pregnant when that school year ended. And every year I would say, babe, I think I need to go back to work. I think I need to get a job
Hmm.
because I wasn't bringing in any money. I was trying to write and it wasn't doing anything. And I would say, I think I need to get a job. And every year he said, you have a job. You're a writer. You just don't get paid for it yet. And so, and having that kind of support is a tremendous privilege. I'm also a hugely spoiled only child and spoiled in the realm of I have parents who think that I just hung the moon and put the stars in place. And it's not that I got everything that I wanted when I grew up. We were lower middle class and sometimes mom's clipping coupons and doing her thing, but there was an overabundance of belief in me, belief in my abilities, support. And I always had that to fall back on. And I kind of just assumed that's how everybody grows up. And it was a shock to me to realize, oh no, I'd go to a friend's house and their parents don't treat them like that. Their parents don't give them that unconditional faith. And I think that's the greatest thing you can do for a kid is instill that kind of confidence. There's a part of you then that grows up thinking, yeah, it's a huge, huge long shot, but why not me? Why not me? Maybe I can be one of those, that tiny group of people who actually is able to make a living doing this.
That is huge. That is such a huge foundation for life in general. I mean, you know someone's always in your corner no matter what, not judging you, not telling you you can't. Why would you dream that big? Makes you feel invincible when you have people that love you unconditionally and support you unconditionally. That is such a huge, I mean, it's a
It is.
rarity too, and
It
it's a
is,
huge thing.
absolutely. And I distinctly remember breaking up with a boyfriend when I was 19 because he was like, "Oh no, that'll never happen. And I was like, bitch, watch me. And because I was like, no, I am not going to stay with a person who does not at least dream as big as I do, and who doesn't at least think that I could possibly. Yes, it may be the most ludicrous, but you have to at least go with me that far in thinking that maybe this could happen. And that is who my husband is. And so that's why we've been together this long, is because he is that person. We do that for each other. It's like, yeah, go do that great thing. I believe you can do this. But like I said, hugely privileged when it came to my parents. And then when it came to my husband, it was a matter of I knew what I wanted out of that relationship. I knew what kind of person I wanted in my corner. And I was lucky enough to find him. I found him a lot earlier than I expected. I never thought I would get married that young. That was a shock, but I found him in college.
Well, and to find him and him being that person already at the age of 22,
Hmm.
that's huge for him as well because we are who we are in college and there's a lot of other distractions and things happening. And it's hard to find yourself when you're surrounded by all this all the time and to know who he was and to be that for you from the very beginning. That is, again, you were double lucky.
No, I'm the first person to acknowledge. And, another area where we've been really lucky is when you get married at 22, you still have a lot of growing up to do. And we grew in the same direction, which a lot of people who get married that young don't have that. And that ends up being a starter marriage. And for us, it stuck because we continued to grow and evolve and we went in the same direction. But yeah, I'm lucky and I'm privileged and I don't take a particle of that for granted.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And that's great is that you then get to then do that for your child and be that
Absolutely.
foundation and that sounding board and that vote of confidence, no matter what they're doing for your kiddo. And you're just creating this legacy of that in your family, which is so huge. And you've got a shining example of what a marriage should look like, which is really hard to find these days as well. So it's just going to keep paying it forward. So
Yeah, because
awesome.
I had that example looking at my parents who
Mhm.
have been together since my dad was 15 and they went on their first date and he proposed to her on their first date and they've been together ever since. And so having that example in front of me and then seeing it go on because my daughter is married now to somebody who treats her beautifully and supports her in the things that are important to her. And so knowing that we've been able to kind of sustain that through the generations, you know, trauma gets passed through families, so does the good stuff. And that's not to say that trauma hasn't happened because in my extended family, and both of my parents did not have an easy time of it growing up. And both of them made the decision, we're going to do differently. We're going to have a different kind of relationship. We're going to raise our child differently. So both of them were able to kind of break those patterns and start something very different. And now it's continuing on into these future generations, which is just beautiful to see.
Yeah. And kudos to them because their age group, typically that doesn't happen. They, tend to do what the rest of society expects of them. It's kind of what they did, put your head down and just do the thing that everybody else tells you to do. And they buck the system and they were able to like, hey, we're not doing this. And to do that together in that generation
Mhm.
is huge.
Yeah, because I mean, my parents are boomers. They're mid
Yeah.
70s, and yet my mother will sit there, and maybe we're discussing somebody who's non-binary, and she'll sit there and say, "Okay, now tell me the pronoun I'm supposed to use because I want to get this right." And God love her, it's difficult to unlearn all of that societal conditioning, but to see people in their 70s who are open to that and who are actively trying, and you think about how much society's changed just in the last 20 or 30 years. And my parents are adapting to that. My parents are rolling with it. And I'm like, great. That's what I want to do when I'm their age. I don't want to get locked into who I am now at 55 and say, this is it. This is who I am forever. I want to be able to stay flexible, stay curious, and stay open.
And I've seen that in your writing and in the books and the characters that you have developed. You can tell that. And I love that. So let's get into the characters a little bit. So I was telling you before we started, I was talking to you about The Dead Travel Fast.
Mhm.
Gosh, I think I read that like 2010-ish, and I loved the main character then. That's not a series, it's just a standalone book, but what I loved about it, it's set in a time where most of the time women are the whole point is to get married and do what
Mhm.
society tells you to do and live a life according to society, and she bucked the system, and so I fell in love with your writing back then because of that. It stuck with me, and then when I got into your Julia Gray books and then Veronica Speedwell. So we'll get into those, but is that the first series you've ever written, Julia Gray
Yeah,
series?
I wrote the first 3 books in the Julia Gray series, and then I took a break to write The Dead Travel Fast, and then I
Yeah.
wrote the next
Okay.
2 Julia Gray
Got it.
books, and I wrote 4 Julia Gray novellas.
Okay. Got it. So Julia Gray, tell us about her character a little bit because she starts off like a little bit of traditional and then she morphs. And I love watching her evolution through that first novel. Talk about her character and a little bit about the book just for a second and then how you created her and why you created her.
Well, Julia's character, she is, these are Victorian murder mysteries. They're late Victorian, 1886 is when the first one starts. So they're very much in the realm of the world of Sherlock Holmes. It's gaslit London streets, and Julia is a very conventional character when the first book opens. She is an aristocrat's daughter. She's the daughter of an earl. She has gotten married to somebody she doesn't particularly like all that much. She did what she was supposed to do. And on page 1 of the first book, he drops dead. And her life changes because a private inquiry agent, which is basically a private detective, comes to her and says, hey, your husband thought that he was about to be murdered. Let's investigate this. And she ends up getting completely swept up in this investigation. She ends up forming an attachment to a man who's from a different social class. And she evolves over the course of the 5 books and the 4 novellas to basically be a woman who kind of does her own thing, but still largely within the confines of upper class British society. She's not too far off that path. But I loved writing her. She was just so much fun to develop. As I mentioned earlier, I wrote 7 or 8 books that live in a box in the attic. They'll never see the light of day. They were not great. They were not published. And my agent had been trying to get me published for a really long time. And she finally said, I want you to stop writing for a year. Just don't write. She said, just read. Just read. And she said, at the end of a year, you'll know what to do. She said, but right now, you don't know who you are as a writer. And the only way to figure out who you are as a writer is to know who you are as a reader. And so we hung up the phone and I thought, okay, well, I'm never going to talk to this woman again. That was the kiss off. It was a very nice kiss off, but she fired me basically is what I'm thinking. But I took her advice because what else was I going to do at that point? I felt like I'd been beating my head against a wall for so long. So I went off for a year and I just read. And the thing that I added to that though, is I only read things that I love. I didn't slog through anything. If I didn't love a book by 3 pages in, chucked it across the room and kept going. And at the end of the year, I looked around and I went, oh, all of these books have a mystery structure. They all have a British sensibility. They all have a sense of humor. They all have a touch of romance. And I realized I had a blueprint for what I needed to be writing. And so I sat down and immediately started writing the book that turned into Silent in the Grave, which took me 2 years. And that was the first Julia Gray book. So at that time, it's been, 3 years since I've talked to my agent. And I sent her the manuscript along with a little, hey, remember me? And a week later, she called me and said, yeah, this is it. She said, you did it. I'll be able to sell this. And it took her another 2 years to be able to place it. But when she did, that's when we got the 3-book deal. And that book won awards like right out of the gate. We had a lot of success with it and just kind of kept building on that and kept going. So,
And I love the fact that you wrote her within the confines of what you could as a time frame, but she was a widow at that point. So widows tend to get a little bit more leeway for some things. She could get away with a little bit more being out in society and not having to have a chaperone and all the things
That's
that go along
that's
with.
why she was a widow,
Yeah.
honestly, is because I wanted her to be able to buck some societal conventions, and
Yeah.
widows had more freedom than anybody else. And so I was
Yeah.
like, great, I got to kill her husband right off the bat. Got to kill him. And then I thought, okay, well, if we're going to up the stakes, if her husband is dead, then his murder is the highest stakes thing that she can be investigating for her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the one that's going to give her the most personal development. And I knew I wanted to develop another Victorian series. And I was putting together the character of Veronica Speedwell. And my agent got her placed at my dream house, which is Penguin Random House. So I write for an imprint called Berkeley, which is
Okay.
under that Penguin Random House umbrella. And it's everything that I could ask for out of a publishing
Oh, that's
relationship.
awesome. Because you hear the nightmare stories as well about all the
Oh my God,
publishing
yes.
chaos. And so to have
Yeah.
something like that and be in a great situation, that's huge. Yeah. So Veronica, her story, I love this woman. She, from the very get-go, is like, "Wow, this gal is different." I mean, just kind of her off the wall, and she just goes and does the
Oh,
thing.
she would drive you nuts. People are always like, "Oh, would you like to hang out with Veronica?" And I'm like, "No, no." She would annoy the bejesus out of you. And it's, but at the same time, I also think she's great fun. And I wanted to create a character that I could really let off the chain because of the fact that Julia had been kind of bound by some convention still. I wanted a character who was like, no, I do not care. I don't care. And that's where Veronica came from, was a person who was just going to say, yeah, all these stupid little rules that she'll have, I'm not doing that. And that's who Veronica is very much.
And I love that about her because you find yourself cheering for her and going, "God, I wish I could do that." I wish I could be that free about myself. And it does inspire you when you read her to really look within yourself and go, "What am I ignoring about myself that I'm not letting come to the surface?" And I do think these characters are really great for some self-evaluation, honestly, because they inspire me to use my voice, to speak up for myself, to not give in to conventional ways, those kinds of things. And I think those characters are so important. Just like any character, if it's non-binary, it's a black, brown, yellow, green, whatever color that you are in the world, to see yourself in a book. And it also inspires you to become more of the person that you want to become. So representation matters, but also at the same time, it's also great to see something that you want to evolve into or become more like. And even though she's kind of off the wall and has her, quirkiness about her, she's also something you admire greatly because of her kind of giving the middle finger to society. And that makes it so wonderful about who she is and at that time frame. Like, how refreshing that is. And then I'm not gonna ruin her backstory, but there's a quirkiness to her own family history. There's a secret
It's
that gets
unconventional for
yes,
sure.
that gets revealed, and it's super cool as well. Like, I started diving into that family history more because I was paying attention now to that, based on her. But the thing I loved about Veronica is that even though she does what she does and she is who she still has a very big heart and loves people that she loves fiercely and is very loyal as well.
Oh,
So she's not this flaky, go crazy, do her thing. She's actually has a lot of depth to her as well, which I
she
think it's great to
does.
see.
And over the course of the books, the ninth book in the series just came out. So
Yes.
I have spent a lot of time with these characters. And over the course of the 9 books, Veronica is assembling a found family because her blood family is not one she can be close to. And from book 1, we see her putting together these relationships and finding people that she can connect to, people she can love, people she can be loyal to, people she can defend with her life. And yeah, watching her growth and creating her growth has been just an extraordinary joy. And when I first started writing her, I thought of her as a character people could use for entertainment and escape, because you get reader mail and the bulk of it is always, this is great, it was so much fun, and that's wonderful. Every once in a while you get the reader mail which is, I took your book to chemo, or I was dealing with my parents' death or my divorce, or even the first 6 months with twins when they wouldn't sleep. And people use them as coping mechanisms, which is tremendously meaningful to me when I get them. But
Yeah.
the one thing I hadn't anticipated is a different sort of reader mail that I've gotten with Veronica than I've ever gotten before. I have one reader who emailed to say that she started her own company and she called it Glasswing, after Veronica's favorite type of butterfly,
Yeah.
because she started looking at Veronica going, I can do that.
Mm.
I had another reader who sent me a picture of herself standing on the front porch of the first house that she had ever bought. And she bought it for herself. And she was wearing a jacket with butterflies all over it because that's what she wore to the closing, because she read a Veronica book and said, I can do that too. And that was something I never anticipated at all. I thought Veronica was going to be someone that people would enjoy for the escapism and this larger than life quality of hers, which I feel like could be a little bit obnoxious if you knew her in real life, but is hopefully entertaining on the page. I didn't expect that people would use her as kind of an inspiration sometimes to go after the things that they want to do and to
Yeah.
feel empowered by that. This fictional depiction of a woman who never existed, that they would take that so much to heart that they would extrapolate that and apply it to their own lives. That
Yeah.
has absolutely blown me away.
That's so great. I mean, to get that depth and to get that type of appreciation for the characters that you spend so much time diving into and developing, and it's like a true appreciation for all the things you put into this, which is really, really cool.
Oh, it's incredible. And invariably, those are the messages that show up when I'm having a really shitty day.
Yeah. Yeah.
They will turn up when I need them. And so it creates this gorgeous kind of little Mobius strip of support then, because in turn, those readers are telling me, hey, you know what? You may feel like crap right this second, but
Yep.
you did something important.
Yep.
You created something that has been meaningful to me. And this is how it created meaning. And it was like, great.
That's awesome.
Now I
Well, I
can
want
go do it some more.
Yo, God, yeah, that's a for sure. It's a validation of like, hey, yes, you've gotten awards and all those kinds of things, but it's more than just the entertainment piece of it. It's a lot deeper than that, which I think has got to feel so good. So we'll go to the characters again. Where did you find the values and these characteristics for these characters? Where did you go? How did you develop them? How did you go about deciding what they were going to contain as vessels to create these series and to allow them to carry these stories in their back?
If you're going to create a series character, it's a little bit different than building a character who's going to be a one off, who can have a
Hmm.
complete character arc in one story. If you're going to do a series character, you've got to create someone who has flaws that are going to be visible page one, day one, and carry through an entire series. And you have to have some flaws that can be resolved. You have to have some flaws that are always going to be there because it's part of who they are, because you have to create conflict for them in every single book. And every single book is going to have its own kind of
Hmm.
conflict. Every novel is a mystery. Every novel has got a puzzle to solve. But some of the books are more flavored by what Veronica's personal conflict is in that book. Others are more driven by the puzzle. It depends on what suits each plot best. Veronica herself is actually an homage to a woman who really lived. When I went to college, it was a university that had a very small history department. So we didn't do women's history. And I had to study that on my own after I graduated. And I got really intrigued by Victorian female explorers, just this real little tiny niche of women's history. And the side of it that's not lovely is a lot of times there's big colonizer energy with this. I'm going to go in and tell people what they're doing wrong. These poor benighted souls who need Jesus. But then the other side of it is you had a lot of women who were traveling simply because they wanted to see other parts of the world. They might have been botanists, they might have been archaeologists, they might have been zoologists, they might have just been travelers. Great thing about Victorians is they always wrote about what they did. They were writing letters back home, they were keeping journals, they were writing articles for publications. They would come home and they would give lecture tours. So we know so much of what Victorians were up to. And one woman in particular, by the name of Margaret Fountain, was just absolutely riveting to me. She was a lepidopterist. She was a butterfly hunter. And it was a genteel way for a Victorian woman to make money, because butterfly hunting is not bloody. You can travel the world and net yourself some butterflies. It was lucrative. And Margaret traveled the world without a maid, without a companion, which these Victorian women a lot of times did. A lot of them just went out and did their thing, packed up a saddlebag and took off. Margaret hunted butterflies on 6 different continents. She made quite a lucrative living doing this for herself. And she left behind diaries that we can actually read. They've been published. But the fascinating thing about diaries is they are very frank about the people Margaret was sleeping with, because Margaret slept her way around the world. Margaret was not just sleeping with men she was married to. Margaret was not just sleeping with white men. Margaret had a really nice time on her adventures. And I thought, God bless Margaret. She was out there just living large. And what I love about her is not even necessarily the choices that she made. It was the fact that she made them. She shattered all of my preconceived notions about what a Victorian woman was doing. And I loved that. And I thought, okay, if I ever write another series character, I'm going to make her a lepidopterist in homage to Margaret Fountain. So that's why Veronica Speedwell is a butterfly hunter, is because that is my little tip of the hat to Margaret, to say, thank you for living large, Margaret.
Heck yeah. Well, you got to bring her to life in a book and carry on her legacy. Did she have kids? Did she end up getting married and
No,
have kids?
no,
No?
she did. She did marry, but she never had children. She started a horse farm in Australia that went bankrupt.
Mm.
But the thing is, she hunted butterflies for like 40 some odd years, and
Yeah.
she ended up dying on Santo Domingo with her butterfly net in her hand. And
No.
there's even a little stone memorial to her with her name on it and everything right where she dropped dead, because even when she died, people recognized that Margaret was a force of nature.
Heck yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. I love that it's based on somebody real. I have another friend, Erica Roebuck, that writes a lot of
Oh,
historical
I met
fiction, and
Erica. Yeah.
yeah, I love Erica, and I had her when I started doing this podcast, I actually did it on Instagram first as, like, Instagram Lives, and I recorded an Instagram Live with her about her characters. It's kind of the same thing, women that are strong, kind of the backbone of some very important things in the world, and usually very rare to find a woman that's doing the kind of things that they were doing. So I wanted to have her on and talk about the same things. But her characters are kind of that similar, just out there doing a job that normally was required of a man and doing an
Mhm.
amazing job. And they're rarely heard about and not talked about. So I love that you've mentioned her name, because now I'm going to go research and read more about her as a real life person. You invoke such a great lightheartedness about it as well, that it kind of gives, it's like this push and pull a little bit of the dialogue, which I love, because you never know, is this be a serious conversation? Will this be lighthearted? And I love that that goes back and forth, because that's life. Because one minute we're talking about this, and the next minute you're cracking a joke about something. That's life. And I think you write these characters that we can relate to because they are real. Like, they're not going to go through life not making a joke about anything. Like, that's not
Well, because
realistic.
that's how I process things, is I'm going to joke about it, especially with these characters, because of the fact that a lot of times they are dealing with things that are either they're very serious, we've got a murder we're trying to solve, or they're kind of ridiculous, and they're appreciating the ridiculous factor that's happening. I think humor is just the way to get through it. I know a lot of people are terrified to read historical fiction because it can be very dry, it can be very dense. And it was Elizabeth Peters in her Amelia Peabody series who taught me that historical fiction does not have to be dry. Historical fiction can be fun because you know what? People have always been fun. There have always been people with a sense of humor. There are fantastic photographs you can find of Victorians cracking up. They loved a joke, but we don't have that impression of them. That's who they were. That's who human beings have always been. We've always used humor as a coping mechanism, as a bonding mechanism, as just a way to enliven our days and to give us more pleasure in the time that we spend on Earth. So why wouldn't you want a book that reflects that?
Yep. I absolutely 1,000% agree. And it's been such a fun way to read about something. And this is what I love about historical fiction too, is that, there's things that maybe pull into a storyline that are true events, things that have happened, or something about the timeline that is historically correct. It makes me want to go research those things and go back and kind of figure out what it was like then. But at the same time, you're able to not change history, but you're able to have a different view of it without making it another intellectual viewpoint. It's a completely different way of looking at history. And I love that you've weaved the historical fiction piece with the lightheartedness of the humor and the personalities that you've given these people. They're so vivid in my brain when I read these stories. It's truly a movie going on in my head as I'm reading these. And to me, that's like the ultimate fantastic book, 5 stars, check mark, when I have a movie and I have visualizations of these people, and if I don't have that, it's done. I have too many books on my shelf to read. We already have enough overflowing bookshelves. Why waste my time on a character that I can't visually see and feel and hear and laugh with or cry with or whatever that is?
Yeah, I mean,
And,
people read for different reasons. I don't
yeah.
personally read to suffer.
Yes, yes.
Every once in a while, I will force myself to read a book, like if I'm doing some anti-racism work or something, and there's something I feel like I need to read.
Yeah,
I will do that because I feel like, okay, I need to read this in order to become a better human being.
sure.
But if I'm going out to read fiction, I do not like trauma fiction, and a lot of people need it because that's how they process their own
Yeah,
uh, their own experiences. And that's great for them. That is not a headspace I want to be in
yeah,
when I'm reading for escape. I
yep,
want to have fun.
yeah,
I want it to be enjoyable.
yep,
I don't want it to be terribly gritty or terribly dark. And I'm extremely particular about the thrillers that I read for that very reason.
yep.
If it's going to be a thriller, I need it to come wrapped in a little cotton candy
I know.
in order to make it fun. Um,
Same.
yeah.
Same. I love that. Well, I do feel like your characters and these books, um, everybody can enjoy because, like I said, this main through line that you have with these characters are they're strong, they're vulnerable, they're funny, they are kind of bucking the system, and they're just so delightful on all levels. But yet they deal with some serious issues, so we can put ourselves in their shoes. Like, how would I handle this situation? We've all had dark things, hard things happen in our lives. But at the same time, you're giving it a different layer with who they are as people and just their sense of humor and some different things you throw in there, which I absolutely love. So I just thank you for writing these characters. I've plowed through these books, and now I'm like so excited that you have a grave robbery now coming out. It just released like last week, is that right?
You did a week ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you already have a ton of reviews on Goodreads. I don't know where most people go look at the reviews, but on Goodreads, there's already a ton of stars on there. And I think most of your books, if not almost all of them, have like literally it's like 4 point something stars on all of your books. And there's thousands and thousands of reviews. So many people love the books like I do. And I'm so delighted that you are continuing to write the Veronica Speedwell series. I'm looking forward to more stories with these amazing women. And I think that there's more to glean from just it's an escapism book. It's a great way to find a role model in life as well. And like you said, women have taken them to cancer treatments and to hospitals when they're birthing their babies. That says a lot. So I think they're worth everyone's time to go and take a peek at these books because it's an inspiration for me for sure. And plus a nice laugh and also a whodunit kind of ending as well. I get all of it wrapped up in one. I get to figure out how wrong I was about who did it and if I was on track. So I love that too.
Oh, thank you so much. I enjoy, I love, not just enjoy, I love writing these books.
Yeah.
And the Veronica Speedwell series is continuing. I'm getting ready to start writing number 10 in a few months. I have
Nice.
another project to wrap up first. I had a contemporary thriller that came out in 2022, and I'm in the process of finishing up the sequel to that, which will
Yeah.
be out next year. So yeah, I'm getting to kind of spread my wings a little bit and do some things that are different. Um, and it's all an ongoing, source of joy for me.
And I meant to tackle that topic as well. Your contemporary series, it's called Killers of a Certain Age, is your first book.
Mhm.
It follows 4 women that are assassins. And it starts off with their very first assignment, which it was riveting. I was sucked in from the very beginning with that. And then that right away goes to their retirement party. And it's so unique and so different. And I love the characters behind that as well. It's not your typical midlife storyline. And it's super entertaining, and I saw on Goodreads that you had the next book, it says 2025 coming out, so I can't wait to
Yeah.
follow along.
Well, I mean, so often because these women are all 4 of them are 60 years old. And so often when you read a book that has a 60-year-old protagonist, it's either, oh, I've got breast cancer, or oh, all of my children have just left the nest and I'm super depressed, or oh, my parent just died. And it's like, could we just once see some 60-year-old women who are having fun, who are kicking some ass, who are still doing the job that they love and, dealing with ageism in a society that does not always value women of a certain age. And that book was so much fun to write. And it has been extraordinarily successful, which is why my publisher very kindly came and said, would you like to write a second one? And I said, yes, please. So I'm finishing up the sequel, which will be out next year. And I'm very excited. It's wonderful to have a contemporary project and then go back to Veronica because we're 9 books into Veronica. We're getting ready to start the 10th book. By the time the 10th book is done, we'll be so close to 1,000,000 words with these characters. And that's a lot of time to spend with the same characters. So it's really nice to keep it fresh because I had just written Killers of a Certain Age when I went back then and was able to write a grave robbery to go back to these characters that you've made such good friends with.
When you write these characters and to wrap this up, why is it so important for you to have a main character that is living this kind of life, that is a strong female, that is outspoken, that is bucking the system? Why is that so important for you?
Because I think I write a little bit from my own position, which is the one question I asked the most often as a child is, but why? I never once just accepted what I was told to do. I would do anything if I understood the rationale behind it, but it had to make sense to me. And if it didn't make sense and it was just because, or I thought it was stupid and I wasn't going to do it. And so I think that there's a good dose of that in these characters as well, which is they're looking to make sense of their world, and they're not just going to accept a status quo and roll over for it, because a lot of times the status quo is stupid. It's easy, or it's habit, or it suits, heteronormative white male patriarchy, or it is what it is. And so these women are like, but does it have to?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a way to affect society in a way that is within your skill set, and you can do something within what you're doing, making an impact through a method that you're very skilled at. Not all writers are meant to be on a stage speaking in front of a thousand people. But this is the way that you can impact still thousands of people through the women and the characters that you write. So I think it's still doing the work of showing strong women and using all the things you're great at. And I think that's important to have, showing more of those types of women. I think there's a lot out there. What are your favorite books that you've read that also have strong women? And was there another book or series or writer that you really admire for that?
Well, right now I'm absolutely in love with Jessie Q Sutanto. She's just a phenomenal writer. She's much younger than I am, so I love the fact that
Yeah.
I've caught on to her writing, and
Yeah.
she has done both ends of the spectrum. She's got a really successful book called Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers, which
Okay.
features a much older protagonist. But then she's got the newest book in her Aunties series is coming out next week, which is, I think, The Good, the Bad, and the Aunties. It's book 3, and the main character is a young woman, but her aunties are the ones who kind of run everything, and they also get her into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
They're kind of capery murder mysteries, which are so much fun. So
Okay.
she's got this wonderful sense of humor, and she features a lot of older women. And most of the time, she's looking at them from the perspective of younger women looking up
Yes.
to an older generation, which is really, really lovely to see. And so to see somebody of Jesse's age writing characters that are older, I think is phenomenal, because
Yeah.
she's obviously doing it with a tremendous amount of love and respect. And, oh, hey, that's going to be me someday.
Yeah.
And I think the more representation we get of older women who are just living their lives and having fun, and not necessarily having to process trauma with every single project we see them in,
Yes.
but we get to
Yes.
see them all across the board. I
Yeah.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. I think it gives us the fullest picture of what our lives are like and what they're going to be like as we get older. They don't
Yeah.
all have to be, oh, I'm wearing elastic waist pants and I'm sad. I
Yes.
mean,
Yes.
my generation grew up with Golden Girls. That was okay. B. Arthur was 55. She was my
Yes.
age in Golden
Yes.
Girls. That was what we thought 55 was supposed to look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the reality is it doesn't necessarily look like that anymore.
Mm.
And so we're changing our views on aging as our life expectancy gets older, as people are doing Pilates into their 60s and
Yeah.
70s, and we're taking better care of ourselves, and we're lengthening out middle age to where it looks a little bit different than it used to. We get a much fuller experience, and we need to see Jamie Lee Curtis still looking stunning and Angela
Yeah.
Bassett still
Yes.
laying on the red carpet,
Right.
because we need to see women doing extraordinary and powerful and gorgeous things. We need to see what we are going to look like. We need to see our reflections all over the place.
That's right. That's right. Well, I love it. I'm loving these characters. I'm loving these books. So thank you. Keep writing them. I will be a loyal reader for all of them. Are you out and about at any events that anybody can come out and find you and see you in person? Anything happening right now with that?
We have just wrapped up all of the launch stuff for A Grave Robbery,
Okay.
but people can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky, and at my own website, deannaraybourn.com. I do a monthly newsletter.
Awesome. I always ask every guest, what is one thing right now that's helping you feel awake, well, and empowered?
I get up every morning just before sunrise to do just a few yoga poses and to meditate. And it has absolutely changed my life. I start every morning then from a place of quiet, centered groundedness. And I'm able to approach my entire day knowing that I have taken care of myself first. And when I've taken care of myself, I can take care of everything else and everybody else. But I've got to be the first person I take care of. And so I take that little bit of time for myself before sunrise every morning. And so I'm just sitting there as the sun is coming up, and it's been incredible
How long have you been doing it?
since November.
Ah, good for you. Isn't it crazy how, at first you're like, oh, it's so hard to do this. And then once it gets going, you're like, I can't imagine not doing it. It probably feels like just who you are now.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing was the first morning I did it, I thought, you know what? Yes, this up yet. My desk is 2 feet away. And so I went and sat down and I wrote a scene. So by the time I went downstairs to breakfast, I was done writing for the day by
Crazy.
8:30 in the morning. And so then the
Yeah.
whole rest of my day just kind of unfolded. And so that's my new routine now
Yeah.
is I write before breakfast. And it has completely changed I've always been a morning person, but it has really enabled me to take advantage of my circadian rhythms in a
Yeah.
way that I just never did before. And so that's by taking care of myself, my spirit, my work, then the whole rest of the day I can devote to author business and wife,
Yeah.
because being a writer and being an author are two completely different things.
Yes. Yes.
Different skill sets, different requirements,
Yes.
different activities. So I can do the author stuff for the rest of the day. I can do things with my husband. I can be there for my parents. I'm putting in a vegetable patch. I
Ah,
can do the things that I can take my French lessons, anything that I want to do like that. I've got time
yeah.
because I've started off the day in a way that just works perfectly.
Awesome. I love that. Well, you're inspiring me to get up in the morning because I'm not there yet. So I'm working on it. But well, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. I thank you
My
for writing these
pleasure.
characters and for letting them inspire us to be more awake, well, and empowered. I just cannot wait to read the next one.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Oh
been
my
a
gosh,
pleasure.
you bet. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you again for being here. I am so grateful for your time. And if you liked what you heard, please head to where you listen to podcasts, rate and review so we can be found by other people. Please share on Instagram, your social media channels, wherever else you go, so we can reach as many people as possible so they can meet these amazing women and hear these conversations. If you'd like to connect further, you can find me over at my website at HallieSawyer.com or on Instagram. I'm usually going to be at Hallie_Sawyer or The Odd Life, which is this podcast specific Instagram account. All right. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you soon.